and welcome to yet another special edition of Saturday Morning 7 TV with Crooked Dice. And Karl's here, so's Peter, so's the rest of the Edge Hill gang. That's why we're being on best behaviour today, so there'll be no singing, no dancing, and no naughty rhymes or innuendo. So straight to the point, Karl, according to the note that's still written on the desk in front of me, it's World Dracula Day on the 26th. I'm not going to tell them what month. Let people in 5 or 6 years' time worry about that. And of course, we're at the 125th anniversary of Dracula. We don't need to know why Crooked Dice wants to do Dracula. Who doesn't want to? But how did Crooked Dice come to be doing Dracula 7 TV?
Absolutely your fault, Mr. Brown, I'm afraid. With your contact with the lovely Stokerverse people, you kind of gave me a little nudge and said, well, it's 125 years. Would you be interested in doing something? And I kind of went, ooh, yes, I'm quite interested in kind of gothic bits, and I'd like to do maybe a kind of a gaslight kind of stuff. Not so, that's quite interesting. But we've got a bit on. There's quite a few plates being spun at the moment, but I do know a man who can. Dr. Peter Wright, who joins us. Hello, Peter. We've worked with Edge Hill University for a good few years now on a variety of projects, and we already had something planned and in the works for this year. But I thought, why do one when we can do two? So I kind of twisted Peter's arm and said, what about doing this? Because I happen to know that there are there's an initiative going on at Edge Hill at the moment called Edge Hill 19, which is looking at late 19th century literature, I believe. Peter, you can probably be at the...
Yeah, it's an interdisciplinary research group that looks at the long 19th century. So there's lots of work going on in sort of 19th century studies and sort of early 20th century studies as well. And there's a big interest, obviously, in the Gothic and in Dracula. So I knew my colleagues would be really interested in the idea of us having the opportunity to adapt Dracula and do some other additional work around that. So when Karl suggested that we did it, I leapt at the opportunity. Just a really exciting possibility.
Because, Peter, I mean, the way Karl has tried to cushion it is that in a thank you gift, he brought you more work to do, essentially. But I take it with your love of horror, it doesn't feel like a labour, it's an absolute love.
Well, over the last 5 years, I've pretty much got used to Karl giving me more work to do, to be honest. But yeah, the Dracula was a labour of love very much. I grew up watching Dracula movies. I suspect a few others in the team did as well. So I grew up watching Universal Horror. I grew up watching the Hammer movies. Then, after I'd seen all those as a youngster, I kind of read the novel. And I've always liked Dracula. I've always admired it. And I've always admired the way it's been adapted. And I thought, an opportunity to go back to the original novel and try and adapt it for a completely different medium, that's quite an exciting possibility. So that was probably the primary motivation, was to take the novel and see if we could adapt it into a skirmish game. And here we are, eight and a half months later, and it's pretty much ready to play test and kind of have artwork done and things like that. So
very good.
Done pretty well. And everybody who worked on the team, there's 12 of us. We've got 3 of them here tonight. It's been fantastic. It's just been a real labour of love, I think, for most people.
Well, quite rightly, you've said you've got some of the team here tonight. Would you care to do the introduction so that the lovely people at home know who they're talking to and listening to?
Yep, we've got Claire with us, we've got Isabel, and we've got Laura.
She reluctantly waved there because she has to admit she's part of the team. So, lads, forgive me here. I mean, we're obviously all quite old. They're all quite young. Peter, whenever Dracula was put on the table with the team, was there that sort of, well, which Dracula are you talking about? Or was it very quickly hammered down, hammer horror, I seen what I did there, what you were going to be working with?
Yeah, I think from the very beginning when Karl came to us and said, do we want to be involved in Dracula, it was always going to be going back to the novel. As you've said, the Stoke anniversary is coming up, the anniversary of the Dracula novel, and I think it was that opportunity to go back to the source of so many films, TV shows, comic books, computer games, just go back to the beginning and take a different look at it to try and adapt it for a different form, different medium. So there was never any discussion about what kind of Dracula or which Dracula we were going to adapt. It was always going to be Stoker's Dracula, right from the very beginning.
Okay. Well, one then for the team, excluding you, Peter, because you've read far too many books. I mean, was this for... And I'm sort of expecting you, sorry, folks, to be speaking on behalf of kind of the wider team that isn't here. But was this sort of your first time lifting Dracula off the shelf for a read-through, or was this a book you were kind of passingly familiar with already?
I personally was already quite familiar with it, and I think quite a few people on the team had already read it, because it seemed like everyone was really passionate about the novel itself. So there wasn't like too much of a discrepancy there about having to, revisit Stoker's text in any way.
Yeah, I feel like I was actually one of the least knowledgeable members of the team, actually, because we were fortunate in that a lot of people on the team are studying literature and were very familiar with like the text and like surrounding texts already. Whereas obviously as a creative writing student, I had read Dracula before I signed up for the internship, but I wasn't particularly the most knowledgeable. So there is a bit of a spectrum, I guess, of familiarity with the work, but as Laura said, like the overarching passion was there in everybody, I think.
Cool. The next thing I think a lot of people want to know, I mean, read Dracula, I'm a wargamer, and reading Dracula, wargaming, tabletop gaming, does not immediately... You can read some books and go, oh yes, I could see this in a board game or a battle. You read Dracula and think, playability here is kind of limited. So how did you approach reinterpreting that to make it gameable?
That was the challenge right off the bat. That was in the initial design brief in there. Is how do we go about it? I think Peter described it very well. It could just be an exchange of letters, but it won't be very exciting on the tabletop. We looked for the places in the novel where other interpretations and adaptations of it had kind of placed action. The team went through the novel in fine kind of detail, really, and picked out those places where there's a potential for conflict, or probably more importantly, there are gaps in the novel where we could explore and exploit. And kind of drop some action in, but we actually settled on those fairly quickly, I think, from memory. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean we sat down and yes, exactly what you were saying, Andy, struck us. It's like, how do we take essentially a drawing room horror novel and make it into a war game? And we did start to plan out the kind of major kind of kernel points in the story and think, okay, how can we expand those while still remaining true to the spirit of the novel? So, for example, the first skirmish in the game takes place after Jonathan has escaped from Dracula's castle, but has been pursued by Dracula's servants, and he arrives at a Transylvanian village, and the skirmish takes place in and around the village. So it could have happened in the novel. It didn't happen in the novel, but it could have happened. And I think those were the kind of criteria we adopted. Try to remain faithful to the novel, its tone and general narrative direction, and try to think of things that might have happened by just drawing elements out of the novel and reimagining them. It was important to all of us, I think, that we remained as faithful as we could be. Otherwise, you're not adapting the novel, you're adapting something else. So we tried to be as faithful as we could be, and we tried to honour the kind of tone and integrity of Stoker's original. So we charted out 5 skirmishes, each a kernel or cardinal points in the novel.
it was painful sometimes because there's the brilliant section of just Jonathan trapped in the castle is just wonderful. There's so much kind of tone in that, but it's a single character, and it's difficult if you're trying to structure it as a war game to have who are the opposing forces in there. One person versus arguably Jonathan against the Count and some occasional brides, and it is difficult to do. So we just had to kind of look for other places and sometimes sacrifice stuff which we really loved. But it didn't work.
There are some parts of the novel where they're absolutely essential. So the staking of Lucy, for example, that kind of moment where the heroes have pursued her to a tomb and finally dispatched Lucy. It's a great moment in the book. You think, okay, how do we make that into a skirmish? And that was something that we really had to puzzle over. And we were still puzzling over it yesterday when we were drawing up special rules for the skirmish. And we think, okay, finally, it feels like it works, and it'll go to playtesting, and we'll make sure it does. But we knew we really wanted that part of the novel in the game, but how to make it work without reimagining it as something very different was quite a challenge. But I think we got there. Hope we got there.
Just on the point of playtesting, probably over here, round about now, there's going to be a picture of Peter playtesting. And if you look very carefully, Peter will be kneeling on a table. So the next time any student finds that the teacher is telling them to get their feet down of the table, feel free to have screenshotted this and go, well, if a lecturer can actually kneel up on a table, I think I can put my feet on, but quite safely.
Safety won't let me stand on it. That's the thing.
No, of course not, but apparently they'll allow you to kneel on it. I mean, at my age, I debate kneeling even to tie my shoelaces. Obviously, 7TV. 7TV is made up of lots of little elements as well. We've got all those little sort of event cards and things like that there, and all the gadgets and whatnot. This time round, what does Dracula, I just want to call it Dracula TV, what does 7TV Dracula throw into the mix in terms of those 7TV components that people are going to be familiar with, and how did they come into being?
Yeah, as ever, 7TV is quite broad in what it does. So all those little accessories is where it's really important for us to get as much tone as possible. So we do that in the profile, but also all of the kind of the accessory cards in there. And we, I think Peter's idea quite early on was the diurnal deck. So we normally have a countdown deck which goes and it dictates the length of the game. But we thought, no, we want something that just reflects a little bit more of that kind of that gothic tone and mood. So the diurnal deck covers the kind of the four phases. I'm going to try and get these right in here. Day, dusk, night, and dawn. Is that right, Peter? I always forget one. There's too many Ds.
Nods of approval. It's okay. You didn't make the game, Karl. You're not expected to remember everything about it. They made it.
Thank you. But they act in exactly the same way as our countdown deck does at the moment, but the differences are that they may wax and wane depending on the scenario. So you may have a different number of cards. You may not have some phases at all in certain games. So that gave us a very interesting component to play with. I'm going to hand it over to Peter and the team to tell you a little bit more about how they developed that.
Yeah, I'd like to hand it over to the team actually, because it was the great thing I think about Dracula is most of it has come out of roundtable discussions around how we develop things. So when we were developing the diurnal deck, it was essentially the 12 of us, 13 of us, sat around looking at the novel, looking at appropriate quotations, looking at how time works in the book, and then trying to pick out the appropriate quotations or concepts for day, dawn, dusk, and night. I nearly forgot the other one there. I don't know if the team have any memories of working on those.
Yeah, I really loved the process of doing the diurnal deck, because going through all the quotations to try and find things for different phases, it really kind of, that's when it hit home that we were actually adapting the novel properly, because the characters, you know, we were just taking them from the book, but this was the first thing that we did that kind of felt like poetic license almost, outside of finding the gaps in the novel that Peter and Karl were talking about. So there's one particular quote by Stoker where he's talking about London and he says something like lurid light and inky shadows, and it's such a gorgeous quote, and I just love how we were able to get some of the source material back in to the actual game through using it for the Diurnal deck titles. It was really fun.
It was quite amusing as well, I guess, because obviously as we were going through each of the phases, it was like, well, we need to try and make sure that we balance these equally between the heroic cast and the villainous cast. But as we were going through it, it just seemed that every quote that we found, we were like, oh, well, this would work great for the villains because we could do so and so, we could do this. And then we came back to it at the end and we were like, so we've got a lot of stuff for the villains. The heroes don't have an awful lot of stuff to help. So then we had to then go back through them again and go, right, well, we need to balance this so that, you know, we don't have a losing team every single time. So it was interesting trying to get the gameplay right with also, you know, being faithful to the novel.
And it's not helped, I think, by the fact that the sort of heroes only really decide to hunt vampires at night, which means there's a lot of material there related to night and twilight, and they don't really they hang around during the day. When for me, go and hunt the vampires during the day. It just seems safer. But yeah, so we did have a fair few problems finding appropriate daylight kind of quotes or phrases to stock the day deck or the day part of the Diurnal deck.
But I think what fell out of that was, for me anyway, was the challenge. No, they shouldn't be advantaged there. You know, that's when it's dangerous. So how do we balance other mechanics and other accessories, whether they be artifacts or our epistolary, which we'll kind of talk about in a minute, I'm sure, to kind of try to reweigh that balance. So that was a nice bit of game design for me that kind of fell out of it. That, oh no, that gives us another challenge and another problem to fix, really.
For the team then, last time sort of we talked was obviously about 7TV fantasy, and everything had sort of been broken down to individuals within the team that they sort of had a focus on, and then they would come together in groups. They'd talk about their ideas. There'd be a bit of cross-chat about, yes, that's a good one, that has to be left out. Was there the same difficulty and sort of building having to go on at that level with you guys in the team? Was there a challenge for ideas to fit in, or things that you felt had to be left out that you wished could have been there, or was it all quite sort of agreeable in a team spirit?
It was a really very different project. Fantasy started big and got bigger. So there's 230 odd profile cards, and we're looking at about 40 for Dracula. And we all started by going off and researching particular characters. So everybody had 3 or 4 characters they researched and read about and built up. And then we brought those back and developed the profile cards collectively as a group. But really the artifact deck and the Diurnal deck and the epistolary stuff, which, as Karl said, we'll come back to in a minute, was much more of a collective enterprise than I think fantasy was, where we had so much to do, we really did have to break it down and all go off and do our own things and come back and sort of develop it that way. This really was largely a collective effort. I was thinking back, and it's quite difficult to point at any one thing that we did as individuals and go, yeah, that was mine. It was very much more a collaborative and collective kind of response to the novel, really. I don't know if you guys have sort of got any particular perspective on the way we worked on this, really.
Yeah, because even with the profile cards, initially we kind of got the characters that we kind of chose. We all got to choose 3 or 4. We were assigned some. So, for example, I chose Seward to look at, and then I got things like the coachman and villagers and things. But after the first couple of drafts, after the first draft maybe, even then it was all kind of a collaborative redraft where we all sat down and we all kind of went over each other's cards. So it's got to the stage at the project now, really, where even the individual stuff, it's not really an individual contribution anymore because we've just kind of workshopped together and changed things that much.
Sorry, Peter.
You say some of the profiles were really quite challenging as well, so it was good to get 12, 13 people working on a particular profile, and this is how we ended up with 3 Jonathan Harkers, which was a necessary response, I think, to Harker's changes in the novel as a character. But it's been a real joy for me to be able to watch, the team interact at that level, at that real sort of micro level, when we're building up sort of even individual cards in the diagonal deck or individual artifacts that they've developed collaboratively and collectively.
Sorry, Andy, I was just going to say the joy of this one is that everyone knew the text. With the previous projects that we've worked on, there's been a bit of a learning curve. What's pulp? Fantasy was easier, but pulp certainly had a learning curve. There wasn't anything. This team has been absolutely amazing out of the gate. In about 6 to 8 weeks, we had like a fully formed body of research that we could draw on. We really benefited from. I think a lot of the team had studied it certainly at A level. I think I'm right in saying, was that O level? But anyway, it kind of approached it before, and honestly, within 6 to 8 weeks, we had research on backgrounds and artifacts and everything, all drawing from that. Having the text there to be able to draw from, and I've never seen a team kind of come together and produce such a fantastic amount of work in such a short space of time. It was wonderful to see.
Well, funny, that's kind of what I was going to ask, because obviously anyone who's watched our videos before, and obviously I know Isabel was involved and has been before. Peter, this isn't your first time around the mill by any extent, but for Laura and Claire and the rest of the team, I mean, was this the first engagement with one of these types of projects for Peter in his private laboratory of gaming at Edge Hill, or had you been involved in previous projects and well, sort of knew what you were letting yourselves in for, frankly?
No, previously I haven't been involved with any of the projects, and I've never actually done any type of wargaming. But when I saw it was Dracula and it was going to be a faithful adaptation, I mean, look at me, obviously I love Dracula, so it was like I need to be involved in it. So for me, that was the kind of learning curve, was getting my head around the mechanics, which I'm still confused about, but it's fine.
So's Karl.
So anyway.
I'm kind of the same in that respect. This is my first project with Crooked Dice, but it's always something that's interested me, the idea of wargaming. I've just never previously had the time to really get into it, so this has been like a really, really rewarding experience because it's given me that kind of time to focus on it, and I've actually really enjoyed myself. And on top of that, like Laura, I really did enjoy Dracula as well because we studied it, and it's really different looking at it from an academic perspective to reading through it and then getting all the stuff you need to make a war game. But it's just been really fun.
Funny, you did mention earlier on, the experience or the sensation at looking at those quotes, and it does sort of come to mind that I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, but I imagine at a certain point there was that sort of dawning sense of, well, we're this is kind of fun. We're getting to do practical business experience here. We're working with a company that's established track record. We're getting to work on a product. That's lovely, and we're actually getting to do it with Dracula. I mean, was there ever a point where you were sitting there in the room working and went, oh, I can't screw this up?
Yeah, non-stop. I mean, the whole thing for me has just been a dream to do because I'm a huge fan of gothic fiction and I love horror films as well. So it was like, oh, I've finally got a chance outside of literature to use all my useless horror knowledge and put it into a game. So it's just, yeah, I did have that feeling like, oh, this needs to be spot on. But I think that's really driven the project, along with like Isabel and Claire, to be as good as it is. I think everyone's worked really hard on it because everyone was so passionate about it.
Laura, you had that rare moment where you went, yes, this is my moment to shine.
That's all I'm saying for the rest of the podcast.
I've done my bit. I'm getting to work with Dracula. Thank you all for coming. Goodbye. But on that, just sort of on that score, when we're saying, you know, he's all loved Dracula and all the rest of it. I mean, it wouldn't be fair, I suppose, not to give a little couple of minutes airtime to the various personifications of Dracula. I mean, I know you went straight in for the novel, but I can't imagine a group of people sitting around a table, even though they were focused on the novel of Dracula, didn't at some point go, yeah, but, you know, I really enjoyed or I loved it. I mean, did you get that time to sort of fan and nerd a bit about other depictions of Dracula as well?
No, I'm working really hard. There's no off-topic conversation in the workshops, Andy. There's not a chance.
That's not off-topic. It's loosely related.
Peter says this, but literally the first thing we did as a group was go to see Bram Stoker's Dracula, the 1991 version.
Ah.
So, yep.
She's just got a gold star from teacher.
I think that film proved to be a bit contentious, I think, amongst the group. It was like a real divide of you either love it or hate it. I love it, personally.
I mean,
it's kind of it's a bit similar to what we've done because there's two Jonathan Harkers in that movie because, you know, you've got Keanu Reeves' performance, and then his accent is a completely different character. So,
and the hair colour.
And the hair.
Did we ever come up with a Jonathan Harker special effect, which was, you know, will get splinters if he touches you? Is that wooden? Is would be the further in it. The thing that kind of struck me as we were doing it in there is that how there's been so many adaptations, but none of them are really that true to the novel. There's loads of bits that are dropped out, or characters that are changed, or fused together, or mixed up over. You know, the Coppola one follows it fairly closely, but I was really quite surprised going back to the novel again. And yeah, there's quite I've never quite seen it on screen as it is in the novel.
I think the book's actually really quite theatrical, isn't it? You can see Stoker's origins there. It's quite static in places as the scenes play out. And if you make a movie, then you can't. It's not really going to work like that. Todd Browning's Dracula, at the 1931 Universal one, is a little bit like that because, you know, technology and staginess and things like that. But subsequent adaptations, the Hammer one particularly, really dynamic. There's lots of energy in it, particularly in the sort of climactic scenes. So I think there is that what we encountered, that problem of form and how you take the novel and you adapt it to a different form. It really does necessitate quite a lot of tweaking in places to give it pace and to give it movement and give it action.
And we decided to stick with the kind of the 7TV kind of meta as well, that not only is it a war game we're adapting here, but we are under the conceit that, you know, this was produced by Sidney Barron, and there's a lost production of Dracula out there that was TV, so we wanted it to be kind of cinematic as well, but we still tried to weave in some of that kind of authenticity that we wanted to keep as well as I've been developing that. But yeah, there's another challenge as well.
So that brings it then to the depiction of Dracula himself. I mean, I for one always felt that the Bram Stoker's Dracula kind of done a reasonable job of kind of giving us old, wizened, but yet powerful and menacing Dracula. And it did have the day walking ability and whatnot as well. But how did you then hone in to settle on, and ladies and gentlemen, here is the visage of the Dark Lord himself. How did you decide on the look for Dracula?
As ever, we'd always started with a novel. We've always gone back to that. So the depiction that we've got in it is, as he's kind of described in there, the longer white hair, the longer moustache, the hairy hands, which often get kind of missed out. We've gone back to that and tried to stick with it. You know, the clues are all there. We don't really need to reinvent it. So we did that, and we've had a few discussions about, okay, so if this was made in the kind of late 70s, who's David Gurr? You know, which actor is going to be playing him as well? And I think we've got a pretty good one. There were some amazing suggestions that came out of it. There's some brilliant casting, which we'll have to slightly change the names of to check the innocent. But some really, really wonderful ideas. I think I'll give this bit away. For a long, long while, we were looking at. There's a Terence Stamp play of the actual version of Dracula around that kind of time, and for a while, old Stampy was a bit of a kind of a front runner with a potential casting. But I think we found someone who kind of fits that kind of 7TV like B-C list kind of star.
Yeah,
it should never be too high.
Those allegations were totally unfounded and nothing was ever proved. I'll give you a job in my film studio, said Sydney.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm not going to read the note that Karl said about, and you just give me a nod when it's time for me to mention, and we can put up the picture on the screen, because he just completely ignored the prompt that I gave him, and I'm just going to put the picture up on the screen. Instead of the rather long-winded explanation you gave us about staying authentic, have a look at the picture that Crooked Dice is going to be using for Dracula. And yes, it is quite a thing to the novel. Thanks very much for nothing, Karl. Consummate professionals to the end.
Steve Bloodstone, who I've worked with a lot, and it's absolutely amazing. We just got it just yesterday, and it's insanely good, as is all the stuff that Steve does. And by the way, you'll get to meet him. It's his birthday, and he's coming along to the expo. So if you're on the stand, I think you'll be able to get to see him. But yeah, that's our depiction taken from the novel with a little bit of kind of casting choices for us mixed in there as well. There's still more to come on that, but he'll be doing some illustrations for the book.
Lovely. Now, in case I've missed something, I'm going to defer to Peter here, because you're in charge of the industrious side of this operation, as opposed to Karl, who just makes mugs and t-shirts and puts things in pretty boxes and sit there looking pretty for people. Yeah, you see, it's not even a Crooked Dice mug. Is there anything from your side that you feel, this is an important thing, and that silly fool Andy didn't ask any of us about it, so I better tell him it now?
I think I'd like to mention the assistance of Dr. Maddie Potter, who's been our Gothic expert, who joined the team right from the very beginning. And Maddie knew nothing about wargaming at all. She knew a huge amount about the Gothic and Stoker and Dracula. And we've gradually brought her over to the dark side. She's kept us on track with our Gothic elements, and I think we've probably ruined her life by introducing her to wargaming. So it was a fair exchange, really, I guess. But yeah, Maddie's contribution has been fabulous in all kinds of ways. Cultural advice, literary advice, and bringing some real gems from quite a lot of reading and detailed reading and research about Stoker himself. So it's been very, very helpful indeed. It wouldn't be fair for the evening to go by and not to mention her. And I think probably I'd really like to recognise the team and its dedication to really achieving as close an adaptation as possible in honour of Stoker and the novel. And it's just, I keep saying it's been a joy, and it has, because it's given us the opportunity really to take one of the cornerstones of Gothic literature and English literature and try and pay homage to it, really, and to try and get it right. Obviously, our players will be the judge of that, but I think we've done a good job. I'm reasonably confident we've done a good job. But I'd really like to open it up to the team, really, and how have they felt about it? How have they felt about the experience, and what were the highlights, really, for you guys, and what you think? What were the achievements, and possibly what were the really awkward things we wrestled with for possibly far too long?
I think like one of the challenges that we had, like we were talking about earlier, was balancing the heroic cast and the villainous cast. So it was kind of a joy and a burden at the same time, because we were going off and researching different characters that were assigned to us, and then some of the characters are more peripheral. So, for example, I had like asylum inmates who were only mentioned in passing in the novel, and we really had to flesh those characters out. So it was really fun working with the team, just thinking, okay, how would we do this in the tone that Stoker would approve of. But yeah, it was all those little bits that we had to jig that was a challenge, but it was so much fun to do at the same time.
I think as well another challenge was like the epistolary deck that both Peter and Karl mentioned earlier, because again it kind of came from the fallout of the villains have got too much of an upper hand, so we kind of need the heroes to have something that is going to make it a fair game, basically. So the epistolary kind of came out of both that, and it had its like basis in like I guess its mechanical basis, I should say, from the magic system that we created for 7TV Fantasy, which was also lots of fun and definitely not hard work at all. Speaking from experience, because I also worked on that. And just, I think, yeah, the epistolary deck was a real challenge, again, because trying to mechanically find something that was going to be interesting on the tabletop that we hadn't already included in, like the profiles, the diurnal deck, but also finding a way to make it true to the book. So we ended up with 5 epistolary books, each with 6 unique special effects in that certain models will be able to access. So it was kind of trying to tonally theme, like, you know, we've got Seward's diary, so it's like, well, what sort of things would Seward be able to bring to the tabletop? What sort of things would Van Helsing be able to bring? And it did prove to be quite a challenge in the end. Hopefully we got it right. Crossing my fingers, but...
Well, if it's any reassurance, folks, to date, there's been nothing that Crooked Dice has put out where anyone's gone, that's a bit naff. The final question has to be, and I think, Isabel, you're disqualified from answering. Karl, you're forever disqualified from answering, if only because the answer takes too long. Peter, you're also disqualified. So on behalf of the rest of the team, I'm afraid it's going to be down to Claire and Laura.
Thanks.
Yeah,
No pressure, then.
You're welcome. No pressure. How would you... And don't think you're being circled out here. I pick on everybody with this particular question. How would you sell this game? I mean, my normal one is you're on the bus and there's a wee granny sitting beside you. Go, oh, what are you doing? She tells you to... And you've literally... Oh, I'm in the market to buy a war game of a unique nature for my nephew. Why should I buy yours? And she's getting off at the next stop. You've got like 60 seconds. How would you sell Dracula 7 TV to her?
Oh.
It's hard, isn't it? Yeah, I asked Karl that the first time and he actually went, can we retake this?
All I can think of is something very inappropriate, and we're being professional, so I'll hand it over to Claire. You're welcome. All right.
You can message us. You can message us all what it is later.
I will. And it's
I'd,
short of 60 seconds. Sorry, Claire.
I'd really play up the element of, okay, so it's 1976, there's this lost production of Dracula that's just been unearthed for the anniversary. There's behind-the-scenes scandal, and it's aiming to be as faithful as possible, but somehow fails spectacularly. This is 70s Dracula. It's a bit mad.
We've put you in too much of a spot. The granny slightly scandalised at the behind the scenes stuff and all. She's about to kind of like faint, but the guy behind you leans over and goes, "I'll buy it. Where can I get it, love?" Scandalous stories. I'm all about those.
That was better than anything I could do, Claire, so...
No, it's always a hard question. As I say, Karl even stumbled on it the first time too. I have no doubt you have all done exemplary work, and I know that I and many others will be watching and waiting with great anticipation. I suppose all that remains for me to do is thank you all very much. Hope that you all have a lovely World Dracula Day, which 5 of us now know is in 2 days' time. Yeah, I'm not going to let us all off that. If I'm going down with this ship, so are the rest of you. For those people who have been living under a rock and still do not know the wonder and magic that is 7TV, shame on you all. Just look through the other, I don't know, 30 videos on this channel. There's probably more than that now. I don't pay count. But go and check out Crooked Dice. There will be a link in the comments. You can even download a free version of the Spy-Fi rolls and have a go with whatever miniatures you own. It's the best fun you can have that's legal. There we go. That's professional and polite, isn't it, Karl?
Yeah, I've got that on t-shirt, so that's fine.
Oh, you've got a t-shirt as well, have you? I contributed by wearing my Blood Angels t-shirt to at least be vaguely in line with the whole vampiric theme.
Have you got an out there?
Have I got what?
Have you got an out there? Not got a t-shirt or a mug?
No. No, I mean, don't get me wrong, I've got a Mantic mug, and a Mantic t-shirt, and a Mantic bag, and a Warlord mug, and a Warlord bag, and a Warlord t-shirt, and even one from a small Polish company that doesn't even make t-shirts, went and printed one for me, but no, funnily enough, I seem
You should
to...
have mentioned it before.
Maybe it's in one of the hundreds of boxes from Crooked Dice that I've got that I'm perhaps missed it in the hunt. Maybe it only comes out at night and I just haven't seen it.
I think you're wearing them all now underneath the top.
Yes, I am actually wearing all of my Crooked Dice t-shirts.
All the ones grown.
Yeah. And you seen it, folks. It was Karl that took us off the rails there, not me for a change. Because he just can't behave himself, really. So, there we go. That's us. We're done. This lot all have to go back to their dungeon and do more work, or Renfield will whip them all firmly. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and inspirations and insights into the development of this one. Except for you, Karl, because as usual, you haven't actually done an awful lot of work by the sounds of things. So, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Edge Hill University team, as ever. And yes, I suppose the normal social media stuff. Subscribe, share, blah, blah, blah. Like I care. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again whenever Karl can free up his busy diary on Saturday morning, 7TV. Goodbye for now, and thank you very much.
Folks.